we're looking forward to having other guests join us as well on weeks going forward. So I did just want to say to everybody, this is the start of a weekly event, and the discussion is going to be around the topic of COVID, robots, and us. And I guess the kind of order that comes in and the priority of each of those sections, that will depend a lot on the preceding discussions. And the changes are happening incredibly rapidly at the moment. So I can't predict what we'll be talking about next week. But back to the more formal introduction. Although we saw the shutdown of Wuhan in China, I don't think many of us spent much time thinking about what a shutdown was going to look like in California, or considered the stress of being so short of critical supplies and equipment. And we ask, where are the robots? This is very similar to the Fukushima nuclear disaster or New Zealand's Pike River mine explosion. The world expected robots to save the day, and they were very disappointed. Once again, the headlines are talking about robots against COVID-19, and I wanted to start a robust and realistic weekly discussion of what robots could and couldn't do to help society at this time. I'm Andra Keay. I'm the Managing Director of Silicon Valley Robotics, a non-profit that is the largest association of robotics companies in the world. I am seeing heroic efforts from robotics companies, but they're very small players compared to established industries. In future weeks, I want to dive into the topics of how do we fund critical technologies and what can we do to reshape or completely change the funding industry when it comes to advanced technologies and science-based technologies. Also, we're going to look perhaps at research directions and what that means. But before that, our housekeeping for tonight. If you have a question for our guest experts, please put the question into chat. And I'll just give a shout out to Erin Pan, who's helping me tonight. And she's going to be coordinating the questions from chat and putting them into a shared document so that we don't lose them. We'll be doing the Q&A after I ask our guests to all do an introduction of who they are and what they're doing. And just to give you a little bit of an overview, we have today Keay Cavalcanti, the CEO and co-founder of Breeze Automation and founder of open source COVID-19 Medical Supplies Group. We have Tra Vu, the COO at Omni Labs, a telepresence robotics and 3D printing startup. We have Alder Riley, founder at Ideas to Stuff and coordinator at Helpful Engineering Group. And we have Professor Ken Goldberg, the UC Berkeley director of the CITRIS People and Robots Initiative. And behind the scenes, we have Bo Amber, outreach design and technology lead for Kickstarter, who's volunteered to coordinate technology for us. And I'm very, very grateful to have Erin and Bo behind the scenes helping me do this when we have so many fantastic guest speakers here to hear from. So Keay, I'm going to kick off with you. Can you please tell us a little bit, firstly about who you are, what Breeze Automation is about, and then how the COVID-19 crisis has impacted on you and what you're doing about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me here. So my name is Keay Cavalcanti. I co-founded Breeze Automation, which is a robotics group that's doing research on kind of very low impedance soft robots, right? So pneumatic robots, hydraulic robots made of fabric and plastic, in an attempt to make robots that can exist in extreme environments and that can go anywhere from the bottom of the ocean to outer space. And I guess 3 or 4 weeks ago, I stopped being able to make these robots, right? Because any given robot is a collection of thousands and thousands of parts from all over the world. And when China shut down and quarantined 780 million people, we couldn't get circuit boards made. At first because, everybody was flocking to US PCB houses. But then, you can't make a circuit board if you don't have all 1,000 components that need to go on it, right? And if any one factory is shut down making those components, then you can't make your robot. So we started seeing these kind of cascading supply failures, and I started reading more and more about the issues that were coming up with supply failures in Italy and China, lack of ventilators, lack of other supplies. Um, and after talking to a medical professional advisor of mine, essentially I had a side project go completely out of proportion. So 11 or 12 days ago, started a open source COVID-19 medical supplies group on Facebook. We're now at 48,000 people in the same Facebook group. We have essentially a flash NGO of about 320 people, including about 40 doctors, 120 documentarians of various kinds, all pulling together like open source documentation from all different aspects of the medical supply chain. A single COVID-19 patient represents something like hundreds of gloves, hundreds of face shields, hundreds of masks. And when you add it all up, suddenly it becomes very scary, right? Suddenly, the fact that we can't get anything out of China because, hey, their containers are on the wrong side of the ocean, right? They shut down, they shipped everything here, nothing went back. So now we have empty containers here that may have to transit the ocean on empty container ships, right? Just to restart a supply chain, and that's 45 days, 50 days, right? So, what we're trying to do is we're trying to be a apocalyptic backstop, a plan C, right? If everything else fails, we still have the ability to create medical supplies, and that's ranging from gloves to face shields to, yes, ventilators, right? Or oxygen concentrators or what have you. And we see our mission as documenting this all, presenting it accurately, and giving people plans for every supply possible that we can find. I've been saying
Thank
that.
you. We're going to dive more into that, I promise you, because I'm certain that there's a lot of questions for you beyond my own. But I think now I'd like to ask Tra Vu, the COO of OmniLabs and Cambria, who's doing both telepresence robotics and 3D printing as a service. Tra, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing and what impact COVID-19's had on what you do?
Thank you, Andra, for having me. I am the CEO of OmniLabs, as Andra has said, and we built the 3D printers, and from those 3D printers, we print the robots. So while we share some of Gree's supply chain woes, luckily it is in much less severity because of the 3D printers. And given what the COVID-19 pandemic has kind of fallen onto us, we decided to build 30 more 3D printers and dedicate a quarter of our capacity to building and supplying face shields to the local hospitals. So that's currently a lot of my team members have to stay at home because of high-risk family member. While we are at half capacity at our facility, our 3D printers are at double capacity. So hopefully this will really help us meet the demand of our telepresent robots, which has also seen a rise, as well as the demand from the local hospital with the face shields projects. And if there's another project that we can help, we would love to.
I think you've raised some really great questions, and I'm looking forward to seeing if there's some audience response there. And now I'd like to ask Alder Riley from Ideas to Stuff, who's also a coordinator at Helpful Engineering, to tell us a little bit about what you normally do and what you're doing now.
Certainly. Yeah, happy to be here. So for Ideas to Stuff, I'll just quickly go over that because I think it's relevant to the current conversation. We're building retail 3D printing factories. So essentially miniature factories that can 3D print objects on demand on the scale of a retail store. So instead of walking into a store and having a bunch of products on your shelves, you'd walk in and have stuff made for you right there in front of you. Before the current crisis, we were seeing a lot of demand from retailers saying, okay, well, it would be great for our supply chain to be able to not rely on having warehouses and warehouses of things and just be able to make things reactive to what customers want. And I think that perhaps ties very directly into the current crisis, because what we're seeing is supply chains kind of breaking down the things that we're traditionally used to. And that's transitioning into my work with Helpful Engineering. We're a group like these, whereas, 10, 15,000 person Slack channel at this point. So lots of people jumping in and designing things. We've got, let's see, we've got O2 concentrators, ventilators, but the thing that we're concentrating on rolling out right now and that we've got test projects around the country are these face shields. These are essentially ways to augment the protective effect of like a standard N95 mask to help, protect these frontline workers from these droplets that could potentially infect them. And especially we want to protect our healthcare workers, because if they go down, who takes care of the people that are taking care of everyone? And yeah, in terms of my role there, so I think the important thing that I'd like to bring to this conversation is the fact that while the heavy industry is still a big part of the American economy, one of the things that we're really happy to see with the helpful engineering especially, and it sounds like with some of the other groups, is that as soon as there was a demand, all those, hundreds and thousands of desktop 3D printers, all of those, laser cutters that are sitting in people's basements, people are able to develop designs quickly that can help be as a stopgap measure in terms of, while the heavy industry is kind of getting its feet under it, we can provide something that's still useful. So.
That's a very good point. I'm taking a note of your questions, and Erin and I are taking a note of all of your questions as well. And someone's just asking me, is there a way to unlock the Eventbrite and or the Zoom for people to join? I am also getting a lot of people reaching out to me, and the Eventbrite takes you straight to a digital link to sign up. So it's really a pass-through. There's nothing I can do to unlock it, or all I can do is publicize the Eventbrite or the Zoom Kickstarter link. And I have been doing that as much as I can, but it's coming in all these individual emails. Many people who didn't RSVP to the Eventbrite. So ultimately, that's not necessarily something that we can deal with while the event's going on, sadly. But something we can deal with while we're going is that I saw Mark Martin was online. So Mark, you're the Regional Director for Advanced Manufacturing Workforce Development at California Community Colleges, and you're also running the Bay Area Manufacturing Discussion Forum. Are you able to tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Yeah, so my my background, I'm actually a mechanical engineer. I've been working in manufacturing for a while, and for the past 10 years, I have a role in the community colleges as a regional director for manufacturing workforce development, which means I work with the Bay Area community colleges. There are 28 of them for skilled trades and career pathways that go into manufacturing. So machining, welding, electronics, industrial maintenance. So things that manufacturers in the Bay Area need. And so my role is to connect the colleges with the manufacturing base to help them find employees, to help our students find good jobs, internships, apprenticeships, and just in general be there as to support manufacturing in this region. So obviously with the COVID-19 crisis, the colleges have been shut down, and so one of the things that I've been working on recently is because I have quite a few contacts in the region with manufacturers. What can we do to help support the efforts, especially around PPE? So one of the things I actually got connected with one of the face shield projects. There's one out of a company called Delve out of Wisconsin that came up with the designs. Very simple, very straightforward, and to see if we can kind of utilize both some of the prototyping equipment here in the Bay Area and the community colleges to kind of improve the design, and then to look at utilizing the manufacturers to actually build it. Because we have manufacturing capacity. As anybody who's worked in manufacturing knows, you can, a company can quickly, build up and make these things in volume versus trying to do it kind of in a cottage industry or small job shop sort of way. So that's what I'm working on now. And I'm also working on gathering which manufacturers are, have the capabilities to meet some of these needs. So I just this afternoon sent out a note to I had about 10,000 links to manufacturers in the Bay Area, and sent out a note asking who has capabilities for, everything from hand sanitizer to ventilators. And I've gotten 70 responses so far of companies, and that includes face shields and masks and different items. So my next step is to then go see, try to understand who's coordinating at the state or federal level of reaching out to manufacturers to see who can meet some of these needs. And so that's what I'm working on. And on the face shield project, I hope to, I mentioned, I missed the name of, I think it was Alder earlier, mentioned the face shield project, and maybe some others have mentioned it. And so to talk with you offline about it, because there's some things that we want to need to find some foam that we want to use and a couple other design enhancements, but then just try to start making them in the next week or so.
That's wonderful news, Mark. I just so appreciate hearing the good news that's coming through with this. And we have one more person online who I would like to ask Ken, who is the director of the CITRIS People and Robots group, to say, well, you do so much more than that. That's a real challenge. Can you say a little bit about what you do and perhaps what you see happening to the community with robots in the current COVID situation?
Well, thank you, Andra. I appreciate you putting this together on such short notice, and it's great to be in this. It's great to see the 50 people online right now. A lot of what my perceptions are consistent with what the others, Keay and Tra and Alder and Mark have said. I think there's a lot of resources out there. A lot of people have time and interest in helping. This is the first time in the world that everybody is trying to solve the same problem. And that is very interesting, that we're all aligned. And I think that everyone wants to help in some fashion. A couple things. One is we're talking about masks, and there's a shortage of masks. One interesting model that I've seen is around the specific thing called PAPRs, which is powered air purifying respirators. These are not just masks. These are the kind of thing that looks a little bit more like a hazmat. It's a helmet kind of thing that you put over your head, and it has a fan built into it with a HEPA filter, and it basically blows air so that you are constantly extruding air out of your suit, and that's very safe. That's what you would wear if you were, let's say, in a bio hazard laboratory. You'd be wearing one of these, and these are actually also in they're in short supply. And there's a group of people who are trying to put together a system for making these open source. And it's a guy named Lakin Moser with the following email: Lakin, LAKIN MOSER @gmail.com. And he's heading up a group that's trying to basically open source the design for these, and they need help from engineers to work on them. The difference between that and a ventilator, by the way, is that ventilators are in short supply also, but the problem is that you'd have to get FDA approval. And that, as everyone knows, is a very lengthy process. And doctors or even patients are going to be very reluctant to take on, a 3D printed ventilator, because it's actually a very sensitive device. And if you get that wrong, you die. So that's the challenge there. But these PAPR respirators, masks, are actually something that don't require FDA, and so you could imagine those. We could provide those to healthcare providers. The other is there was an interesting group that's trying to develop sensors for. We're facing probably very soon a big influx of people who are going to want to be tested or go to the hospital. And what you'll do is imagine that you're self-reported. So you'll say, I have a fever, I feel these symptoms, etc. But people are going to exaggerate that because they want to get tested, they want to go to the hospital. And we have to modulate that. So one idea that's very interesting is to use the camera that we're all using now on our computers to basically monitor us and be able to take a baseline, so that every day it would monitor and say, based on the, you can actually, this is a challenge, but you can check pulse rate and temperature in principle from that camera, and then you'll be able to say you're moving out of compliance. In other words, you're starting to exhibit a faster pulse or a higher temperature than normal, and that would be more reliable than self-reporting. So there's an idea that can we leverage experts who know about computer vision to be able to process that data from the commodity cameras that are built into all of our devices. The other thing is telemedicine, and people have, as you know, I've been working on this for a long time. There's a number of groups, Andra, you know them, who have been advocating for telemedicine to basically allow doctors to be able to, and nurses to do intake without necessarily coming into contact with patients. That technology has been around for a long time, but now I think it's getting a big boost. And I hope that we'll be seeing that in hospitals, because we are just about to face this. It's just hitting us the same way it has in Italy, and I've been tracking the numbers, and we're just on the verge of this overflow in hospitals, and we have to be ready for it. It's going to be very, very ugly and stressful, because we're going to have triage, basically. There's going to have to be decisions made about who we can take into hospitals. So telemedicine will help keep the healthcare providers safe. And then the last element I want to mention is e-commerce. So everybody now is ordering things, not only through Amazon as has been done, but now groceries and food and deliveries that are, this is unprecedented. The demand is skyrocketed in the last few weeks, and the providers cannot keep up. So there's not enough workers in the warehouse. There weren't 2 weeks ago. Now there's even fewer. So the challenge is, how do we actually live up to the demand of all of this new e-commerce? And by the way, I don't think that's going to go away when this virus is over, that we're going to still have a change in behavior. So this is what my group is working on, which is algorithms for robots to be able to pick up and pack orders in warehouses. And that's a very difficult problem. Surprisingly, humans are very good at it. So I'm not saying that we're going to solve it for this crisis. I don't think we will. We're probably thinking about the next crisis, and we should think ahead to that. I think it's really important. This is a dry run. This is a wake-up call for the next thing that could be coming down the road.
Those are excellent points, Ken. In fact, you raised so many points, but I think one of the things that we see is that almost everything has shut down, but we still need to do grocery runs. And the people that are manning those stores are putting themselves at risk, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. And we are already seeing a trend towards micro-fulfillment that just kicked up in the last 12 months in the retail environment. So there are companies that, whether you call them robotics, whether you call them automation, or whether you just call them a retail logistics company, they're looking at creating small-scale warehouses that can replace a store or can be at the back of a store. And in a comparatively small footage, they can automate the packaging and handing out of goods. So it can become something where you're really driving up to an automated goods display. And so the question is this something that we would see roll out really rapidly? Or is this something that it's just going to be a nascent demand that people are going to know that we need for next time? And I was going to throw this back to Tra, because you are meeting the demand at the moment through the 3D printing services that you do. Are you seeing also demand for your telepresence robots? Because there's a lot of evidence that telepresence robots can be useful for telehealth, telemedicine.
Yes, absolutely. We actually are trying to build as many robots as possible, given our reduced capacity and production at this time. But we just received another order from Mount Sinai Hospital for 25 robots. And so beyond the hospital, there's actually a huge demand from nursing homes, because they are in a lockdown and family cannot visit them. So we work with Mon Ami. I'm sure some of you have heard of that organization. They connect teenagers or students who volunteers to keep the seniors. On a regular basis, they actually meet them in person and keep these seniors company. And now they cannot do that. So through our robots, they are able to still have a conversation, and it's a lot easier for seniors, because the robot, once it's delivered, it just works, and the seniors don't have to figure out any technology, right? You just have to have the robot set up to Wi-Fi, which we can also done prior to shipping, and then the students dial in or their family dial in, and then they can have a conversation. They have autonomy to go anywhere the seniors want to go. Without missing a beat. So we are definitely seeing more of those demands. It's been a challenge to keep up with with that pace, and it's unfortunate that we are not able to get more of these robots into the hands of the hospital patients faster. And it actually is still because of this pandemic. There's many moving pieces, and there are things that have to be done in the hospital that are more critical than this item.
I can immediately see how the debate has shifted from theorists saying this is removing the humanity from the connection, the social connection, to saying, hold on, this is respecting the weakened immune system of our elders, and it's reducing their exposure to a whole wide range of diseases. I can see my mother actually saying, finally she can hear what people are saying because it's coming through a device that may go straight to her hearing aid, whereas she always complains she can't understand any of her grandchildren because they always speak too quietly. So those are some potentially good things.
Actually, can I mention one thing on that, Andra? So I was in a meeting for the last 2 days that were 3 hours long presentations. And the interesting thing was, it was new to me to really sit through that kind of length of an experience. And interestingly, I felt more connected to the speakers than I would if I were live at the event. And here's why. I think it was because I have the headphones on, and just as you're saying, their voices are coming right in. So it's very up close, and I can see their faces and I can see their slides right up close. So there's a intimacy, ironically, that I think is happening because of this. Just like we're having right now, that you're having this very direct communication contrary to intuition. I'm curious if other people feel that, because I found we were very engaged. Everyone afterward were exchanging emails saying we actually really enjoyed that discussion.
This is fascinating. It's opening up a whole new field for human-robot interaction that I hope we can actually bring to the conference next week. Please dive in. I'm not necessarily going to call on the right people to answer questions. Whenever there's a topic that you want to answer, please dive straight in. I know Erin is funneling questions to me as well, but I think to an extent, Mark, you've answered this. You're trying to scale up large manufacturing capacity, but the projects that Ken and Alder and Keay were talking about, I think there's been a lot of work at finding the sweet spots. Things like making a mask is perhaps not going to be up to the standards required, but making a face shield is hitting a sweet spot for something that can be done by the community. So how are you seeing this start to triage out into things that can be done by the community? And where would you suggest? What things could people best do to help?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I've had a little experience. It's been a while, but in the medical products field, and you have different classes, and so you kind of have a class 1 or a class 2, and class 3, which is kind of the highest level of safety issues, which was where a ventilator would be, and then a face shield would be either 1 or it's non-exempt. So it's something that's recognized that is not going to be that harmful or is that critical to kind of patient safety. And so that's where the face shield lies. I mean, we can look at it. You can make one in your, there's a how-toons cartoon about how to make one out of a soda bottle. And the thing that, so for that one, there's a lot of projects going on that, and that's great. You move up to the masks and the N95 respirators, and it obviously becomes much more critical that they meet the criteria, the specifications, because any aerosolization getting through the mask. So, just the idea of making it with regular cloth, or there's lots of, let's get seamstresses making them. And there's, debates about, is that good or bad? Or is it better to have some sort of shield there for large droplets to be stopped versus the complacency that people might have that they're being protected. So, and that's where we're at. So I truly believe, and this is that in a way, I'm working on the face shield project. In a way, it's a little bit ridiculous because we have the manufacturing capacity in the United States to have one company step in and start making face shields, who has the experience making dyes, who has some automation, and do it quickly and in hundreds of thousands of volume. But we don't have the coordination that should be there from someone. And who would that be? That would be the government. So in some sense, we're doing very local things to meet the needs, and that's great. And I'm not saying it's not good to be doing these things, but in essence, if you look at it from a larger macro viewpoint, we do need these companies, these large companies who have equipment there, who have expertise on different things, to be able to ask them and say, we need you to do this. And right now it's kind of a free market sort of attitude that's going on with at least the federal government, I feel. And I think when we get our footing and companies have a little bit of time or incentive to step in, it will be the existing manufacturing companies that are going to take control of this. Or I say control, they're going to be able to supply the demand that we need, because 3.5 billion, N95 masks or masks is what they're predicting for the next year. That's a lot.
That isn't.
Follow on that. So our tack at Open Source Medical Supplies is basically one where we're trying to essentially at this point set up regional networks that are supporting their hospital systems, right? So there's a lot of makers out there that want to jump in and start the printer and go to town. And it's very easy to make something that would make someone assume they are safe when they are not, right? And so a lot of what we've been trying to do is actually like find designs, run the biomedical team, make sure that they're okay, right? And like suggest them, right? And a lot of that has to do with what the situation on the ground is, right? So when we look at like face shields, there's a popular design right now that Prusa has suggested for a face shield that has like a big like gap like right above the eyes. And the really unfortunate thing, the thing that our medical team really doesn't like, is that a lot of people will use a face shield and won't use goggles. And if there's a big gap right over their eyes and droplets fall through that gap, now you've actually endangered yourself, right? You have this sense of safety, right? And you have these plans from Prusa and it's great, right? But it's like there's missing elements to just running for it, right? Like if you don't actually get feedback from medical people on the ground on how these will be used, you can cause a lot of harm unintentionally. And so a lot of what I've been trying to do is trying to focus people and say like, look, no, here's the problem on the ground, right? Here's what people are actually doing. Here's what people actually need. Here are the supplies that we actually think are going to make a difference. And checking in with those first responders, right? Because if we just start making stuff, we can make a lot of the wrong thing and waste a lot of energy and put a lot of lives in danger. And a lot of what I've been telling my crews are like, hey, you can't just show up to a well-stocked primary medical facility with a truck full of 2-liter bottle face shields, right? They'll laugh at you, right? On the other hand, if you show up at a facility that's desperate, right, and you show up with the same 2-liter bottles, they may say, great, this is exactly what we need. We have no options, right? There's nurses in Seattle who are cutting out binder dividers and taping them to rubber bands and putting them on their faces, right? Because they have no face shields. On the flip side, it's not like, to Mark's point, like it's not a problem necessarily that makers can ever tackle alone. We had a panicked call from somebody who's running a New York group for us, saying she managed to get through to 2 major hospital systems in New York out of like dozens. And they're like, great, can you send us 70,000 face shields this week and next week and the week after, right? And so like, hey, we can kind of make a difference a little bit to the hospital next door, maybe, right? But in terms of like moving the needle, like it's larger players involved. So for us, the idea behind open source medical supplies is like, the open source may not be the cute mask DXF that we like all go laser cut and then like fold up and like attach to a 3D printed part. It's probably going to look like, here are the tooling files for the injection molded run of face shields. And we're going to set up every injection molding shop in the country with essentially free designs so that they can supply these guys. right? So it's like a whole order of magnitude question and sourcing problem that is actually very familiar to me from, making robots, right? Like the scale of one-offs and hundreds off and, 10,000s off is vastly, the answers are vastly different. And we have to try and catalog all of those in order to make an effective response.
If I can cut in and perhaps build on what Guy's mentioned, the iteration cycle is very important to all these processes. The ability to get these models into the field, get feedback from the doctors, because otherwise you throw the Prusa design to every single person on the planet that's got a 3D printer, and then, well, there's a lot of doctors that aren't getting the correct protection. However, if we've got organizations like Guy's, organizations like Helpful Engineering, allowing a little bit more order to the chaos, like the way we work is we set up a conversation with let's say a medical facility. We send out 50 units of our face shields, and we get them into people's hands. We said, okay, how is this working for you? And then we've got local manufacturers. Our face shield is it's a completely laser cut part. So you get your sheet of plastic, you laser cut the whole thing, and you can get maybe 2,000 of these out of even a small shop in a day. So it's not enough. It's not that 75,000 number, but it's respectable enough even at the small scale. But keeping our production close to where they're needed, not only is that able to, this iterative cycle where you can react to what the doctors actually want on the ground, but I'm not sure if anyone on this call has tried to order anything from Amazon right now, but traditional supply chains aren't really the fastest in the world. And what we're dealing with right now, it's not like a weather event or anything like that what we've been dealing with in recent years. This is something that is, COVID is something that takes nodes off the current network. As people get into quarantine, as workers get sick, then the traditional things that were like, oh yeah, spin up a factory in New York and then the New York factory will supply the whole country. No, that's not how this crisis works. So the process of connecting these local shops to the local demand, sure, you won't be able to supply the 75,000, but you'll be able to supply enough to kind of do this whole thing that where people are talking about, like flattening the curve. We're not talking about inventing the cure in somebody's basement on a MakerBot, but we're just saying, let's do what we can. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Those are very good points, and the FDA did yesterday reduce the requirements for certifying devices and the time frame in which they would certify them, so they would allow things to progress far more speedily. And I know Tesla turned to saying they'd already delivered more than 1,000 ventilators. So that seems to be one aspect where things are working better at scale. But at the same time, I think in Alder, in the Helpful Engineering group, I was trying to find a solution for a NASA JPL team that was saying, we have a ventilator plan. We need people who can manufacture 100,000 of these. And I'm reaching out through our Silicon Valley Robotics Network, trying to contact the large-scale manufacturers. It's, Mark, I should make sure I reach out to you, because it's really a case of, can you bring the right networks together at the right time? And if nothing else, it seems to me that this is a marketplace problem where we've actually been developing the software tools and the artificial intelligence to make it possible for us to finally start to have a local just-in-time manufacturing and the sort of highly sustainable kind of cottage industries that we've often talked about going back to. And people tend to see robotics as part of the large automation machine, whereas I look at it as the possibility to do very advanced things very immediately and perhaps very near to hand. So are we seeing the start of robots being our friend, robots and automation? Or will people look back at this and say, where were the robots? They didn't help. It wasn't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would like to, one thing I agree with Alder about the idea of having one factory supply, because if they do get shut down, I think the resiliency does come from more of a localization. And the question is whether or not that's localization of shops making 2,000, 3,000 units versus, ones making 100,000s that work in the Bay Area and LA and, spread throughout. So I think that's a good point. I do think for resiliency, we do need to have that sort of distribution. I think we're seeing now, and it will be interesting to see if the kind of onshoring of kind of manufacturing from China, which has occurred to some extent as the costs in China go down, is further heightened by this need to say, well, we do need to have that capacity here closer to home so that if we do run into this again, that's important. And the robotics aspect of it really comes up, and even in this very simple product of the face shield, which, as I'm not a robotics person, but I've been around enough manufacturing to know how easy it is or how difficult it is to make a robot deal with flexible and floppy things. So you have a kind of a face shield that's a little flexible, but you can stack that. But then you have foam that you got to grab, and you have an adhesive strip that you either got to lay down something or strip off the back and place it. And then you have this flexible strap that you're somehow supposed to maybe put into a slot or somehow align. So you can spend a lot of money to automate it, but can you use flexible robotics to quickly automate that for a new design versus kind of hard fixed automation? And so that's the thing where I start to think as robots become even more capable of really being able to program them to do that sort of thing, because it would be great if somebody could take the face shield design that we're working on and then automate it, because we're in a point where to make them, you've got to bring all these people together. And so that's a problem right now. Once the crisis kind of moves past this and you can get people together, you still have the issue of, can you keep it here in the US at the cost of that labor? Probably not. You need to have something that can automate it and reduce those overall costs to have that manufacturing base make simple things like that, but which, as we're seeing, can be very critical.
I'm seeing some great questions coming through, and there's a particular trend that I want to pull out there, but just spinning off from what Mark, you just said, there've been a few robotics companies that have had to close their doors in the last couple of years, and it strikes me that a number of them were just too soon. For example, Suitable Technologies was doing telepresence robots, and they went bankrupt this year. And just the year before, Rethink Robotics closed its store. And the promise of Rethink Robotics wasn't just a different quality or different price point for an industrial robot arm. It was saying that we're building the whole package that will be able to be simply programmed by any small manufacturing center, and you can roll it on wheels to whatever station you have, and you can kind of touch train it to take over whatever job you have. And there was a trade-off in speed and accuracy, but it was super easy to use. And I've been seeing requests come through saying, hey, we're a hospital in this part of town and we're trying to set up testing kits, and at the moment we're putting students to work to make 100,000 testing kits. Do you have a robot that could do it? And normally the answer when you say, we need a robot for a job, is we're talking system integrators, and we're talking about a $50,000 robot, and we're talking about a lot of software and training, and usually an additional $200,000 to fix it in place. And it's usually a fixed part of the infrastructure that's going to do a lot of jobs. And what I'm hearing is that the demand is coming for small robots that can be very easily taught and that are very flexible and adaptable about what jobs they do, that can be trained by people with iPads rather than people running G code. Is anybody else seeing the same trends?
Yeah, we're certainly trying to work in that angle. I mean, in terms of what is the next thing for us, the initiative internally is to build, still on the affordable side, because that's the basis of what we do, but definitely trying to, so the Cambria side of our Omni Labs is the open source AI community that we have been building. We are a few thousand strong now, and what we're trying to do is through this community, we ask them to help train very specific items for robots. For example, if you can have a robot that recognize an object as a doorknob, then now the robot can do something with it, that kind of thing. So I definitely see that is the direction, as you say, Andra, and we are looking to deliver the developer product that people can work with and do research on.
Oh, that's great news, Tra. And the questions from the audience are particularly, there's a theme of sterilization. And first off, it's people that are working on printing masks are saying that one of the issues they're hearing back from hospitals is that they can't be autoclaved or successfully sterilized. How can we address this? Are there particular materials or particular designs that can avoid these issues? And I'm throwing this open for anybody with an answer there.
If I can interject, perhaps. So that's one of the things that we get feedback as well, because we're trying a couple 3D printed versions as well. But at this point, the porous nature of 3D prints makes it real difficult to sterilize. You know, you can boil it, you can do all kinds of sterilization processes, but for like a, emergency environment, perhaps those 3D printed things could be saved for perhaps other applications. Like we've got a project in LA where we're providing masks to people who are doing healthcare checks or welfare checks. And, it's not in a place where, a high density environment is just like someone knocking on a door. It can provide a bit of protection. But for things where like it's a hospital environment, that's one of the reasons why we've honestly found the attractiveness of models that designs that can be assumed to be disposable. So just, sure, it's, a couple of cents in PLA and, a couple of cents in PET, but, it's fine. Just make enough of them so that they can toss them out on their lunch break and not have to try and sterilize it again and again and again. But yeah.
So we're doing the design where you can take the shield out. So there's a plexiglass, and then under it is the headband itself is a 3D printed piece. So you can like take out a piece of the glass, and that is easier to disinfect. And then you can put on another 3D printed piece. I think that is probably a combination that works for now. Obviously, we can only provide so many pieces, but that could be a short-term solution.
Yeah, I also want to say something real quick. I put a link in the chat. This is something that we've been researching at Open Source Medical Supplies. We have a guide to the use of 3D print materials in medical devices, and you should check it out. Basically, we've identified a lot of different materials that you can print with and evaluated them from different types of sterilization or not. Generally, the news is bad. There are some specific medical grades. I do agree with the assessment that, like, generally, unless you have a medical grade printer already and you have your own vats of medical grade, like sterilizable material, you're not going to make something that can withstand much sterilization at all. Stuff is porous, right? There's no good way to ensure that you're getting everything. There are some techniques, but like, I totally agree that, we're talking about things that are disposable. That being said, I do think that there have been some knockout successes with 3D printing for this kind of thing, like the Italian story about resuscitation valves, I think is what the news article called them, but basically taking a valve, reverse engineering it, printing it out of MJF, and then, when the manufacturer couldn't make the $10,000 valves because their supply chain broke, printing a whole bunch with an MJF printer in a hospital, right? Like, that is crazy and awesome. Like, a great use of it, and then you should throw it away and never try to reuse it again, right? But like, I think there are narrowly scoped places where printing serves a really great role. I don't think people should try and gear up to print, face shields necessarily, right? Unless there are some truly outstanding designs and they have, medical grades of plastic already. But yeah, I want to be nuanced and a little bit careful. And y'all should check out the doc and see what our documentarian team has to say.
Thank you for posting that and sharing that. And I'll just reiterate, Guy shared that link in the chat to the document about the different grades and the medical feedback on the different qualities of 3D printing.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Andra, because actually I think Trinidad, there was a chat question about the environmental impacts. And let me say something first, and I'll get to that, because one of the things I think, Guy and others have probably recognized and understand is there's a workflow in the hospitals, and this is, done for a purpose of how you, do PPE and how you use it. And most of it revolves around disposable, because that's the easiest way for them to continue on with their, what the doctors and nurses are doing in the hospital versus trying to disinfect or sanitize something that's can be made for relatively an inexpensive amount. So that's why the masks and the shields are all thrown away. Now, going forward, there might be more of a desire to say we need to reduce that, simply because the supply chain might not be able to handle it the next time we have one of these pandemics, or maybe it will, because we will have, ramped up our capacity. But there might be some change in the workflow. But for now, trying to get like a face shield and say, hey, we want you to buy this, they have protocols, they have approved suppliers, they have approved designs. And so that's part of the issue. And then when you start to talk about now also changing your workflow, so instead of just throwing that PPE away, you have to separate it and throw it in something to sanitize it, is an issue. But longer term, there may be a move and workflow process changes so that we reuse stuff and sanitize it, and that might impact the environmental impacts of the disposables.
So thank you for everyone for this discussion. I think it's really important. One thing I want to just mention is the immunity duration, which I have seen very little reporting on, but has to do with how long will someone be immune after they've been exposed and have actually been infected. If that is similar to the seasonal flu, then that means that you're immune for approximately a year. Then we're looking at something like 2 months until this basically plays out, because most people will have been infected and then will be immune for a fairly long time. If it mutates and that immunity period is much shorter, then it's going to be very different. Then we're going to have to be constantly going into these lockdowns, and it's going to be extremely disruptive. Reports from China seem to indicate that the immunity is long. And so I just want to leave you with that positive note that if that is the case, then we're probably looking at 6 more weeks, but not the end of the summer or 18 months as people have been predicting. So I just want to get people's thoughts on that before I go.
That's a great positive image, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much for joining us, Ken. If anybody else needs to drop at this point in time, then please do. But if you can stay around a little bit longer, we can finish responding to some more of the audience questions. And I'll certainly stay for a little bit longer. So thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you, Andra. Thanks, everyone.
You guys have got a really hectic schedule, so if you need to drop now, do. But if you can stay for a little bit longer to answer a few more questions, that would be wonderful. I think the issue of sterilization is one where there are a few angles. There are some robots that are doing disinfecting, and that's been one of the most successful use cases for the use of robots that I've seen. And there is a Bay Area startup that is looking at rapidly producing a lot of autonomous mobile disinfecting robots. There's probably more than one startup, to be sure, but there's one that I know of. But a question for all of you: what materials will robots need to be made out of for them to be safe in these environments. And I have to thank the audience for these questions.
So I think, starting to think about what robots are medically grade materials is pretty relevant, right? Like,
Yes.
PETG seems like a pretty decent exterior surface, right? Right about now, though the material itself is in short supply for, obvious reasons. But I think, that the issues around robots, around sealing, around washdown, right, around interacting with wet environments and sterilization processes, is suddenly a lot more relevant, right? And that's a harder design problem. So it's definitely one that needs to be taken into account. So yeah, that's my thought.
And thank you, Keay. Yeah, perhaps more robots in the food industry are closest to, or the space industry for that matter, are closest to being able to be medical grade. If we look at, say, food safety, food hygiene. But I think we are only just starting to see new and innovative robots in the food supply. I feel like this challenge has hit us before we really have the robots, or the robots at scale, for the deployments that we're needing.
So if it's not directly to your point, but one of the things I might mention, since especially recently, before the crisis, there were a number of food robotics companies that had some troubles. It might be interesting to see how that evolves after this, considering not having humans in the mix might allow for different, maybe not more robust, but definitely different sterilization protocols.
And that's a good point. And one more question from Claire. The internet is under a lot of stress right now. What impact would this have of us trying to steer towards more technological solutions? Whether it's, I guess, sharing the files for the printed masks or sending out telepresence robots. Are we doing the right thing?
Well, I think that it enables the human connection. So to answer the question of, we are trying to do the best we can, and we certainly believe it is the right thing, because if you're in the hospital and all you want to do is say something to your family at that moment, I think it would be a lot of people's regrets if you don't have that opportunity. So while, yes, the internet is definitely feeling the of course it's challenging, but like all technology out there, we have our ways of optimizing it. So if you don't share your video feed, for example, and you just share the audio, then it's a lot better, but at least you can still have some way of controlling and talking to your family members. And also, I think in a way, we cannot let that be our limiter. We should push that industry to do a little bit better at building out their infrastructure, because we have obviously 5Gs coming online, and that will solve some of the issues, but we should push because this is going to help all of us prepare for the whatever comes up next.
That's a really great thought. Now, I think I went through the questions, Erin. There's probably a lot of good comments in there as well. But I'm going to follow Ken's suggestion, and I'm going to ask all of the speakers, perhaps not to leave us with such a lofty thought, but to say, what have you done in the last couple of weeks that you're really proud to have done? Because I know you've all been doing some really great things, but if we want to say thank you very much for your help, can you share one of the things that you're the most proud to have accomplished recently?
For my team personally, we had been able to convert a lot of our additive manufacturing capability to help with the face shield project. And it's awesome to see the flexibility and the how collaborative this environment have been. We are connected with a lot of people over the world, and overnight, people sharing back and forth, and we can redesign and we can print and redesign, and it's done in a day. And I think that's just amazing. It's amazing.
Thank you for that. Alder?
Yeah, so helpful engineering is, thousands and thousands of people. And one of the things that I would like to at least think that is the more powerful thing that we've done is be able to give those people an avenue. It's very easy to get onto these online things and be part of the noise. And in my small way, I hope that I've allowed people to kind of have an avenue for their energies, whether it's connecting a medical center to a local laser cutting shop, or allowing someone who, I got a high schooler in New York City that, is now helping us purify our database of thousands of entrepreneurs. And, it's what he can do with his skills, but it's something. And it's so easy when we're shut in to feel just helpless. But enabling people to have an avenue for their energies is something that I've worked really hard to. And whenever I get a glimmer of that actually working, it's very rewarding. So I hope that the people on this call, regardless of how they're involved, to get involved, because it's all on deck. Everyone has skills that are useful. So
That's wonderful. Thank you. Mark, are you there? What's the thing that you've been proudest of in the last weeks?
It actually has come within the last few hours. It's just kind of been the response of companies to the call for their needs to help meet the needs of the crisis. So I think, and just overall everybody. Everybody that's involved in this call and everybody that's working on stuff and Guy's work, and it's just it's great. It truly is global in the efforts, and I think in the one small silver lining of this, and it's small, but it is there, is that this desire to pull together as a community throughout the world even and come up with solutions to help other people. So.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Mark. And Guy?
I think, right now, I'm incredibly proud of the group that I've been working with. We've written something like 100 pages of documentation and gathered resources from all over the world on standards and different designs and things like that. And it's all volunteer, right? It's all people who are just stepping up and saying, yep, it's a problem, let's go fix it. And that kind of attitude it's pretty amazing. And I think everything that we are doing rests on the shoulders of the people who, really push the open source movement in the first place, right? And who built out the idea that anyone in the world can contribute to design, anyone in the world can make things a little bit better. And because of the magic that is the internet, the whole world can become a better place because of individual efforts like that, contributing to a larger whole. So, incredibly proud of everything that's been accomplished by my team, and incredibly grateful to have been involved in this kind of community for so long to make it possible to even have answers, right? Like the way that we do now. So, yeah.
Thank you, Guy. In fact, thank you, Alder. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Tra and Ken. It's a privilege to know you all, and I am so pleased that you came tonight to have a discussion and to update me on what you're doing and to share it with everybody else who's shown up tonight as well. Super pleased that we had such a great audience. What I'm going to do now is, I think, just say, as Ken said, this is the first time in the world that the whole world has really been united in the same challenge at the same time. And it's an opportunity for us to change a lot of the way that we do things. So I hope that is for the better in the long run. I'm going to stop the recording and say, don't forget to see us next week for another great discussion at the same time, same place. And